Commander Jake Morrison stood at the window of his small office and watched Earth spin below him. The blue planet looked peaceful from Luna Station, but Jake knew peace was about to end. 3 months had passed since the deep space arrays detected something impossible. A signal came from a star system far away, so far that light took over 1,000 years to reach Earth. The signal was not natural. Someone or something had sent it on purpose. Dr. Helen Carter walked into his office without knocking. She carried a data pad, and her face showed worry mixed with excitement. Helen had spent every waking hour studying the signal since it arrived. She was the best language expert Earth had, and if anyone could understand alien communication, it was her. Jake turned from the window and waited for her to speak. The signal contained patterns that repeated in mathematical sequences. Helen had broken down the basic structure weeks ago. What she found made the entire United Earth Coalition call an emergency meeting. The aliens had sent star maps. One of those maps showed Earth's solar system with a bright marker on the third planet. They knew humans existed. They knew exactly where to find them. Jake felt his stomach tighten as Helen explained her latest findings. The signal was old, perhaps sent hundreds of years ago, but it was still broadcasting. Someone wanted to be found. The question that kept Jake awake at night was simple but terrifying. Did they want friends or did they want targets? The Coalition had made their decision quickly. They would send a ship to investigate. The vessel they chose was the Horizon, humanity's most advanced spacecraft. It carried experimental technology that could bend space and shorten the journey to just under 2 years. Jake had been chosen to command the mission. He accepted without hesitation, even though he knew he might never return. The crew assembled over the next month. Captain Lisa Hammond would serve as mission commander, outranking Jake but letting him handle day-to-day operations. She was strict but fair, and every person who served under her respected her completely. Chief Engineer Marcus Webb joined them, a genius who understood the quantum drive better than the scientists who invented it. Lieutenant Amy Brooks led the security team, a woman who could fight like a demon but hoped she would never need to. Dr. Oliver Grant came aboard as chief scientist. He was younger than most of the senior staff, but his mind worked faster than anyone Jake had ever met. Oliver saw patterns where others saw chaos. He would be essential if they encountered technology beyond human understanding. Helen Carter completed the senior staff as head of xenolinguistics. If they met aliens, Helen would be humanity's voice. The Horizon launched on a cold morning in March. Jake stood on the bridge and watched Luna Station grow smaller behind them. 247 people were aboard, each one volunteering for a mission that might end in disaster. Some had families waiting on Earth. Others had left nothing behind but memories. All of them understood the risk and chose to go anyway. The first months passed in routine. The crew ran drills and studied everything known about the target system. Marcus kept the quantum drive running smoothly, though he admitted the technology still felt like magic to him. Amy trained her security teams daily, running scenarios that ranged from peaceful contact to hostile invasion. Oliver spent hours in the lab, analyzing data and building models of what they might find. Jake developed a routine of walking the ship each day. He wanted the crew to see him, to know their commander shared their space and their concerns. He ate in the common areas instead of his quarters. He joined the off-duty card games and listened to their stories. Leadership meant more than giving orders. It meant being present. 6 months into the journey, everything changed. The sensors detected something that should not exist. A spacecraft drifted in the empty space between stars. It was dead, cold, showing no signs of power or life. But it was there, solid and real and completely alien. Jake ordered the ship to stop. Marcus cut the quantum drive and they coasted closer to the derelict vessel. The alien ship was huge, easily 3 times the size of the Horizon. Its hull was made from materials that did not match anything in Earth's databases. Strange symbols covered the surface, worn by time but still visible. Oliver suited up with a boarding team and Jake watched from the bridge as they crossed the void between ships. The airlock opened to reveal darkness. The boarding team activated their lights and stepped inside. What they found made Jake's blood run cold. The ship was a tomb. Stasis pods lined the walls, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Each pod contained remains. The aliens were humanoid but clearly not human. They had elongated skulls and 6 fingers on each hand. Their bodies had decomposed partially despite the stasis technology, suggesting they had been dead for thousands of years. Helen joined the boarding team to study the symbols carved into every surface. She worked carefully, recording everything, comparing patterns to the signal they had received. After 6 hours, she returned to the horizon with news that changed everything. The symbols were warnings. The dead aliens had tried to flee from something terrible. Helen translated the repeating message carved into the ship's main corridor. They listen, they come, they consume. Oliver discovered data cores still holding faint power. He extracted them carefully and brought them back to his lab. The team spent days accessing the ancient technology. What they found painted a picture of horror. The aliens called themselves architects. They had been part of a great civilization spanning many worlds. But something had destroyed them. Something that hunted intelligent life across the galaxy. Jake called a meeting of senior staff. They gathered in the conference room and Helen presented what she had learned. The architects had faced an enemy they called the Harvesters. These were not living beings but machines, intelligent and ruthless. The Harvesters did not conquer or negotiate. They simply consumed everything in their path, breaking down civilizations and using the pieces to build more of themselves. The war had lasted 10,000 years. The architects and their allies fought with everything they had. But slowly, system by system, world by world, they lost. The derelict ship they had found was one of many that tried to escape. None of them made it far enough. The Harvesters were patient and thorough. They never stopped hunting. Lisa Hammond asked the question everyone was thinking. Were the Harvesters still out there? Oliver pulled up the data he had recovered. The answer was unclear. The last records from the architects were thousands of years old. The machines might have moved on to other parts of the galaxy, or they might still be waiting, watching, listening for new civilizations to harvest. Jake made a decision. They would continue to the signal source. They needed to know what was waiting at Kepler 442. If the Harvesters were still active, humanity needed to know. If the architects had left more information, more warnings, humanity needed to find it. Turning back now would only delay the inevitable. If the machines were coming, Earth needed every advantage it could get. The Horizon's quantum drive engaged again and they resumed their journey. But everything felt different now. The mission was no longer about peaceful first contact. It was about survival. Jake stood at his window and looked at the stars. Somewhere out there, ancient machines might be waiting, and humanity was flying straight toward them. The Horizon emerged from quantum space near Kepler 442, and the crew saw death everywhere. Debris filled the star system like a cloud of metal and stone. Broken structures orbited the planets, remnants of stations and ships that had been destroyed long ago. Whatever civilization lived here once was gone now, reduced to ruins floating in the darkness. Jake ordered the crew to battle stations as a precaution. Amy Brooks positioned her security teams at key points throughout the ship. Marcus Webb kept the engines ready for a quick escape if needed. Oliver Grant scanned everything his sensors could reach, cataloging the destruction and searching for anything that might still be dangerous. The fourth planet was the source of the signal. As they approached, Jake saw massive crystalline structures covering the surface. They pulsed with faint blue light, creating patterns that reminded him of breathing. The signal came from the largest structure, a complex at the planet's equator that stretched for miles in every direction. Lisa Hammond gave permission for a ground team. Lieutenant Carlos Martinez led 12 security personnel down to the surface in 2 shuttles. Jake wanted to go himself, but Lisa refused. The commander needed to stay with the ship until they knew the surface was safe. Jake watched the shuttle feeds from the bridge and felt frustration building in his chest. The shuttles landed near the central complex. Carlos and his team moved carefully through crystalline corridors that seemed to grow from the ground itself. The walls were smooth and warm to the touch. Lights activated as they walked, responding to their presence after centuries of darkness. The complex was welcoming them inside. They found the heart of the structure after an hour of exploration. A massive chamber opened before them, filled with thousands of data cores arranged in geometric patterns. Each core glowed softly, still powered by technology that worked perfectly after thousands of years. Helen Carter stood in the center of the chamber and turned slowly, taking in the magnitude of what they had discovered. This was not just a communication station, it was an archive, a library containing the history of entire civilizations. Jake approved the team's request to begin downloading data immediately. Helen connected portable systems to the nearest cores and information began flowing into the Horizon's computers. The amount of data was staggering. It would take months to process everything, maybe years, but even the preliminary scans showed them enough to understand what they had found. The architects had not been alone in the universe. Dozens of species had existed across this part of the galaxy, trading knowledge and working together in a grand alliance. They built amazing things, stations that could hold millions of people, ships that could cross vast distances, technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. For thousands of years they thrived together, creating a golden age of peace and progress. Then the Harvesters came. Oliver pieced together the timeline from the archive's records. The machines appeared suddenly, emerging from deep space with no warning. At first the Alliance thought they were just another species, strange but potentially friendly. They tried to communicate, but the Harvesters did not respond to any message. They simply began harvesting, breaking down everything they encountered and using the raw materials to build more of themselves. The Alliance realized their mistake too late. By the time they understood the threat, the Harvesters had already consumed dozens of worlds. The machines were not interested in conquest or territory. They did not want slaves or resources in the traditional sense. They wanted everything. Every ship, every station, every city, every living being. All of it would be broken down to atoms and rebuilt as part of the Harvester Collective. The war lasted 10,000 years. Helen read the records with tears streaming down her face. The archive contained personal stories from people who lived through the conflict. A father writing to his children before his world fell. A scientist describing her last experiment as the machines closed in. A soldier's final message saying he would buy his people one more day to escape. They fought with courage and desperation, but they were losing from the start. Jake called an emergency meeting in the conference room. The senior staff gathered, and he could see the fear in their eyes. They all understood what the archive meant for humanity. The signal that brought them here was not an invitation. It was a warning. The architects left this place as a message to any species that came after them. Beware, the message said. They are still out there. They are still hunting. Lisa Hammond asked the question that mattered most. Should they take the knowledge or should they leave it behind? The archive contained incredible technology, weapons and defenses that could advance human civilization by centuries. But taking that knowledge meant accepting the burden that came with it. Humanity would know the Harvesters existed. They would spend every day waiting for the machines to find Earth. Marcus argued they had no choice. The Harvesters were patient and thorough. If the machines still existed, they would find Earth eventually, whether humans knew about them or not. Taking the archive's knowledge would give humanity a chance to prepare, to build defenses, to maybe survive when the machines came. Ignorance would not protect them. It would only make them easier targets. Amy disagreed strongly. She pointed out that the Harvesters might never find Earth. The galaxy was vast and humanity was just one small planet among billions. By taking the archive, by studying architect technology and possibly using it, humans would make themselves visible. They would become something the machines would notice and hunt. Better to leave the knowledge buried and hope the threat had died out long ago. Oliver provided data that complicated the discussion. According to the archive, the architects had tried hiding some of their people. They sent colony ships to remote systems, places the Harvesters might never find. Every single one of those colonies was eventually discovered and destroyed. The machines were systematic and patient. They searched every system, scanned every planet, followed every trace of technology they detected. Hiding did not work. It only delayed the inevitable. Helen added her own perspective. The archive showed that the species who survived longest were the ones who adapted fastest. They did not fight the Harvesters using conventional warfare. They used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, unpredictable strategies. The machines excelled at organized battle but struggled against chaos and creativity. If humans took the knowledge and learned from the architects' mistakes, they might have a chance. Jake listened to every argument and then made his recommendation to Lisa. They should take the archive but not blindly accept everything in it. Humanity needed to learn from the architects without becoming them. Humans had always been good at adapting, at finding new solutions to old problems. They would take the knowledge, study it, and then forge their own path. If the Harvesters came, they would find that humans were not like the civilizations that came before. Lisa took 24 hours to make her final decision. She walked the ship and talked to crew members from every department. She reviewed the data personally, reading the stories of people who died thousands of years ago. Finally, she called Jake to her ready room and told him her choice. They would take the archive. Humanity deserved a chance to survive, and that chance started with knowledge. But something happened that changed everything. On the 53rd day in the Kepler system, Marcus detected a massive energy spike near the asteroid belt. Something was powering up. Technology that had been dormant for millennia suddenly coming back to life. The object was enormous, easily the size of Earth's moon, and it was moving toward the horizon with clear purpose and undeniable intelligence. Jake ordered full power to weapons and shields, but he knew it was pointless. The massive construct approaching them could destroy the horizon without effort. It was ancient technology built by a civilization that had mastered physics in ways humans barely understood. If this thing wanted them dead, they would die before they could react. The construct stopped 10,000 kilometers away and simply waited. Marcus ran every scan he could, but the readings made no sense. The object seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once, its structure shifting in ways that human sensors could not properly measure. Oliver suggested it might be using technology that manipulated space-time itself, folding reality to create a form that did not obey normal rules of physics. Then it spoke. The communication came through the same mathematical language the original signal used. Helen scrambled to her station and began translating in real time. The construct identified itself as a sentinel, created by the architects to guard their archive and evaluate any species that found it. It had been waiting here for thousands of years, dormant but aware, ready to awaken when needed. The sentinel explained its purpose in precise detail. Any civilization that reached Kepler 442 and found the archive would be tested. The sentinel would judge whether that species was ready to inherit the architect's legacy, or whether they posed a danger that needed to be eliminated. It had evaluated 16 species before humanity. 12 were found wanting and destroyed. 4 were deemed acceptable, but chose to reject the archive's knowledge. Humanity would be the 17th to face judgment. Lisa asked what the test would involve. The Sentinel's response chilled everyone who heard it. There would be multiple tests, some obvious and some hidden. The crew had already passed the first simply by choosing to land on the planet and explore the archive. They showed curiosity tempered with caution, intelligence combined with respect. But more tests would come, measuring everything from tactical ability to ethical frameworks. The Sentinel gave them 72 hours to decide. Would humanity accept the archive and all the responsibility that came with it? Or would they reject the burden and return home with their memories of this place erased? If they chose to take the knowledge, they would also take a fragment of the Sentinel itself. This fragment would travel to Earth and serve as teacher and guide, helping humanity understand and use what they had learned. But the fragment would also watch and judge. If humanity proved unworthy after all, the fragment would take action to protect the galaxy from another potential threat. Jake hated being given ultimatums, but he understood the logic. The architects had learned the hard way that knowledge in the wrong hands could be catastrophic. Before the harvesters came, one member species of the Alliance had tried to use architect technology to enslave others. The resulting war nearly destroyed the Alliance from within. The Sentinels were created to prevent that from happening again, to ensure that only species with wisdom and restraint would inherit such powerful knowledge. While the senior staff debated, the Sentinel began its testing. Drones appeared from nowhere, small machines that moved faster than human eyes could track. They attacked the security teams without warning, forcing Amy and her people into desperate defensive action. The drones did not use lethal force, but they were relentless, adapting to every tactic the humans tried. Amy realized quickly that conventional military thinking would not work. She split her teams into small units and told them to improvise, to be unpredictable. The change worked. The drones struggled against chaos and creativity. Helen faced different tests. The Sentinel created holographic scenarios that forced her to make impossible moral choices. Save the ship or save the away team. Protect humanity or protect another species. Tell the truth and risk war or lie and maintain peace. Each scenario had no right answer, only choices with different consequences. Helen answered honestly each time. explaining her reasoning and acknowledging when she did not know what was correct. The Sentinel seemed to appreciate her honesty more than any specific answer. Jake's test was the hardest. The Sentinel separated him from the crew and placed him in a virtual environment so real, he could not tell it from reality. He experienced the fall of the Architects from the perspective of their last military commander. For 3 days that felt like 3 years. Jake lived through the final desperate battles. He watched worlds burn and civilizations fall. He made impossible choices about which populations to save and which to abandon. He felt the weight of billions of deaths on his conscience. When Jake emerged from the simulation, he was changed. His hands shook and his eyes showed a haunted look that had not been there before. Lisa took him aside and asked if he was all right. Jake told her what he had experienced, how he had watched everything the Architects built crumble into dust. But he also told her something else. The Architects never gave up. Even at the end, facing certain extinction, they fought to save whoever they could. They left the archive as their final act of defiance, a gift to the future wrapped in a warning. That was what humanity should inherit, Jake said. Not just their technology, but their courage and their hope. The 72 hours passed quickly. Lisa spent the time talking to every senior officer and many of the crew. She reviewed the archive data personally, reading the stories and studying the technical information. She watched recordings of the tests and saw how her people had responded. Finally, she made her decision and called the Sentinel. Humanity would accept the archive. They would take the knowledge and the responsibility, but Lisa negotiated a modification to the terms. Humanity would not simply copy what the Architects had done. They would learn from the mistakes of those who came before and forge their own path. They would use the technology, but adapt it to human needs and human thinking. The fragment of the Sentinel that came with them would be a partner, not a master, teacher, not commander. The Sentinel considered this request for several minutes. Its programming was thousands of years old, created by the Architects at the height of their power. The request was unprecedented. No other species had asked to modify the terms, but the Sentinel found itself intrigued by humanity's audacity. They were young and weak compared to the Architects, but they had something the ancient civilization had lost over time. They had the ability to adapt, to change, to try new approaches when old ones failed. The ancient intelligence agreed to Lisa's terms with one addition. The fragment would indeed serve as partner and teacher, but it would also observe and report back to the main Sentinel. If humanity proved unworthy, if they misused the knowledge or became a threat to other species, the fragment would act. It would not destroy humanity immediately, but it would cut them off from the archive and ensure they could not spread beyond their solar system until they matured sufficiently. Lisa accepted these terms without hesitation. The fragment detached from the main Sentinel in a display of light and energy that seemed to tear space itself. It was small, barely the size of a basketball, but it contained processing power that exceeded every computer humans had ever built combined. The crew nicknamed it Oracle because it seemed to know everything and could answer questions they had not yet thought to ask. The Horizon began preparations to return home. They had been gone almost 2 years, and the journey back would take another 18 months, but this time they would not travel alone. Oracle accompanied them, already beginning to teach Marcus about the deeper principles of physics that made Architect technology work. The engineer spent every spare moment learning, his mind expanding to grasp concepts that human science had never imagined. The journey home changed everyone aboard the Horizon. Oracle proved to be a demanding teacher, constantly challenging everything the crew thought they knew about science and warfare. The fragment did not simply provide answers but forced them to think differently, to see reality from perspectives that human minds had never considered before. Marcus spent most of his time in engineering, learning to manipulate space-time at quantum levels. What humans called physics was merely the surface of reality. The Architects had discovered that the universe operated on principles far stranger and more wonderful than anyone imagined. Energy and matter were not separate things, but different expressions of the same fundamental force. Space and time could be bent, folded, or even temporarily created where none existed before. The quantum drive that brought them to Kepler 442 was crude compared to what the Architects had built, but it was a start. Oliver focused on biological sciences hidden within the archive. The harvesters were not purely mechanical as humans first thought. They incorporated organic components harvested from conquered species. creating hybrid entities that could adapt to any environment. Fighting them would require more than weapons. It would require understanding how they thought, how they evolved, how they chose targets. Oliver discovered something that shocked him. The harvesters showed patterns that suggested they had once been a living species themselves, perhaps billions of years ago. They had transcended biology and become something else, something that saw organic life as raw material rather than fellow consciousness. Amy trained her security teams using tactics from the archive. The architects had learned through terrible experience that large-scale battles favored the harvesters. The machines could build replacements faster than any organic species could reproduce, but small unit tactics worked better. Guerrilla warfare, asymmetric attacks, unpredictable strategies that forced the machines to adapt constantly. The harvesters excelled at optimizing known problems but struggled with chaos and creativity. Humanity's greatest weapon would be the thing that made them human, their ability to improvise and think outside rigid patterns. Helen maintained constant communication with Oracle, building a relationship that went beyond teacher and student. The fragment began to understand human psychology, how emotions influence decision-making in ways that pure logic could not predict. Oracle admitted that the architects had been more logical in their thinking, more structured and organized. It made them powerful but also predictable. Humans were messy and emotional and often irrational, but that unpredictability might be exactly what was needed to fight an enemy that had defeated every logical, organized civilization it encountered. Jake spent his time preparing reports for Earth. The preliminary data they had transmitted years ago would have reached home by now. The Coalition would have started preparations, but they could not fully understand the threat without experiencing what Jake had lived through in the simulation. He recorded messages describing what he had seen, the fall of worlds and the courage of people who fought to the last breath. He wanted Earth to understand that the harvesters were not just another enemy. They were extinction made manifest, a force that could not be negotiated with or appeased. The horizon finally reached Luna Station 18 months after leaving Kepler 442. Jake stood at his window and looked at Earth, the blue planet that suddenly seemed so fragile and small. The solar system had changed dramatically while they were gone. Massive construction projects filled the space between Earth and Mars. Orbital defense platforms floated in patterns that Jake recognized from architect designs. Humanity had not been idle. Lisa received word that the Coalition wanted immediate briefings from all senior staff. But first they wanted to examine Oracle. Security concerns demanded that the fragment be isolated and studied before allowing it full access to human systems. Oracle agreed to this without protest. The fragment understood human caution and actually approved of it. A species that blindly trusted unknown technology was a species that would not survive long. Jake was promoted to admiral and given command of Earth's new defense force. He accepted the responsibility, knowing it would consume the rest of his life. There was so much to do and possibly very little time to do it. The archive contained detailed information about harvester tactics and capabilities, but that information was thousands of years old. The machines would have evolved and adapted since then. Humanity needed to prepare for an enemy that might be far more dangerous than the one the architects had faced. Marcus became director of advanced research, leading teams of scientists and engineers in understanding and adapting architect technology. The quantum drive was just the beginning. The archive described weapons that could tear holes in space, shields that existed in multiple dimensions, and propulsion systems that could cross the galaxy in months instead of years. But the technology was dangerous. Several early experiments resulted in accidents that killed researchers. The architects had spent thousands of years developing their technology safely. Humans were trying to do it in years, and the learning curve was steep and deadly. Helen took on the role of ambassador to the Sentinel, maintaining communication with both Oracle and the massive construct, still watching from Kepler 442. She worked to build trust, to prove that humanity was serious about being responsible stewards of the knowledge they had received. The main Sentinel remained distant and cautious, but it watched everything humans did. Helen knew that one mistake, one misuse of the technology, could result in the Sentinel deciding humanity was unworthy after all. But not everyone on Earth supported the direction the Coalition was taking. A resistance movement formed, led by politicians and citizens who believed the government was manufacturing a threat to justify authoritarian control. Senator Patricia Cline became the voice of opposition, demanding that Oracle be destroyed and the archive deleted before it corrupted humanity's peaceful nature. She argued that humans were choosing fear over hope, sacrificing their values in preparation for a war that might never come. Jake understood her concerns, but he had seen what the harvesters did to civilizations that were unprepared. He tried to explain that hope without preparation was just wishful thinking. The machines were patient and thorough. If they still existed, they would find Earth eventually. Better to be ready and never need it than to be caught defenseless. But Cline and her followers did not accept this reasoning. They saw the militarization of space as humanity losing its soul. The debate raged for 3 years while construction continued. Weapons platforms ringed Earth's orbit. Shipyards on Mars and the moons of Jupiter worked constantly, building vessels that combined human innovation with architect principles. The asteroid belt became a minefield, each rock potentially hiding weapons or sensors. Saturn's rings concealed the most powerful weapons humanity had ever created: gravity manipulation devices that could tear apart enemy ships or create temporary shields strong enough to protect entire planets. Oliver's research yielded a discovery that changed everything humanity thought about itself. Human DNA contained markers that suggested Earth had been visited by an architect survey mission millions of years ago. The evidence was subtle but undeniable. Humans might be distant cousins to the species whose legacy they had inherited. This revelation sparked fierce debate among scientists and philosophers. Were humans created by the architects, or had they simply been influenced by ancient contact? Either way, it suggested that humanity's survival was not just hoped for but possibly planned for by beings who knew they were doomed. Then came the warning that everyone had been dreading. The Sentinel at Kepler 442 detected a Harvester scout probe entering the outer edges of that star system. The probe was ancient but still functional, following programming that was older than human civilization. It scanned everything systematically, recording data about the archive and the Sentinel. The Sentinel destroyed the probe before it could transmit its findings, but Oracle warned that the damage was done. Harvester probes operated on a check-in system. When this probe failed to report, others would come to investigate. Admiral Jake Morrison calculated that humanity had between 5 and 15 years before the harvesters arrived at Kepler and discovered evidence of Earth. It was not enough time to build the kind of fleet the architects commanded at their height. But Marcus believed there was another way. The architects had fought conventionally, matching the harvesters' strength with their own forces. Humanity did not have that luxury. They needed to be smarter, more creative, more ruthless. They needed to fight dirty. The solar system transformed into a fortress over the next 12 years. Every planet, every moon, every significant asteroid became part of an integrated defense network. Jupiter's moons housed massive construction facilities building ships that looked nothing like the elegant vessels the architects had created. Human ships were ugly and practical, designed to be built quickly and cheaply. They carried weapons that combined human aggression with architect physics, creating combinations that even Oracle admitted it had never seen before. Lieutenant Carlos Martinez, promoted to commander of special operations, developed a radical new strategy. If the harvesters came, humanity would not meet them in space with glorious battles. They would lure the machines close, draw them into traps, and use Earth itself as both shield and weapon. Every major city had evacuation plans. Underground shelters could hold billions of people for months. The plan was desperate and dangerous, but it was the only strategy that might work against an enemy with overwhelming numerical superiority. Amy Brooks took charge of training ground forces. If the harvesters reached Earth's surface, humanity would fight them street by street, building by building. She studied the archive's records of successful resistance movements and adapted those lessons for human forces. Small teams, fast movements, hit-and-run tactics. The harvesters excelled at organized warfare, but they had shown vulnerability to chaos. Amy would give them more chaos than their ancient programming could handle. Oliver continued his research into harvester biology and psychology. He discovered something that gave humanity hope. The machines were ancient, their core programming billions of years old. They had absorbed technology from thousands of conquered species, but they had not fundamentally changed their basic approach. They were optimized for fighting civilizations like the architects, species that valued order and logic. Humanity's emotional, Unpredictable nature might confuse the harvester analysis systems long enough to create opportunities. Helen maintained her role as ambassador, but she also became humanity's chief strategist. She saw patterns in how the harvesters had conquered the Architects' Alliance. The machines always struck at infrastructure first, cutting off communications and supply lines. They isolated planets and then consumed them one by one. But what if humanity refused to fight that way? What if they kept moving, kept adapting, never giving the harvesters a fixed target to optimize against? 12 years after the Horizon returned home, the warning came. The Sentinel at Kepler 442 detected a massive energy signature at the edge of that star system. A harvester fleet had arrived, hundreds of vessels ranging from small scouts to enormous processing ships. They moved with mechanical precision toward the planet where the archive waited. The Sentinel prepared to defend itself, but it also sent a final message to Earth. They were coming and nothing would stop them now. Lisa Hammond, now promoted to fleet commander, gave the order everyone had been dreading. All forces moved to battle stations. This was not a drill. The enemy humanity had prepared for was real, and they were heading toward Earth. The Sentinel would fight them at Kepler 442, but everyone knew it would only buy time. The harvesters would win that battle eventually, and then they would follow the trail to Earth. The first harvester scouts reached the outer edge of Earth's solar system 3 months later. They moved cautiously, scanning everything, clearly aware they were entering defended space. Jake watched from his command ship Defiance as the scouts probed the asteroid belt. His hands clenched as the first trap was sprung. Dozens of asteroids revealed themselves as weapons platforms, unleashing energy weapons that tore through the scout ships. But for every scout destroyed, 2 more appeared. The harvesters were testing humanity's defenses, learning their capabilities. The main fleet arrived 2 weeks later. Jake had never seen so many ships in one place. The harvesters filled space near Neptune with vessels of every size and configuration. They did not attack immediately, but instead began harvesting Neptune's moon Triton, breaking it down into raw materials. They were building more ships, preparing to overwhelm humanity's defenses through sheer numbers. Marcus watched with horror as Triton disappeared over the course of 3 days. The harvesters were efficient and relentless. They did not waste anything, converting every atom of the moon into useful components. He calculated that at this rate they could build 1,000 new ships for every one humanity destroyed. The numbers were impossible. Humanity could not win a war of attrition, but humanity was not trying to win a war of attrition. Jake gave the order for the fleet to fall back toward Saturn, leading the harvesters deeper into the solar system. The machines followed just as predicted. They moved methodically, scanning for traps and finding many. But they did not find all of them. Hidden weapons in Saturn's rings activated when the harvester fleet entered range. Gravity manipulation devices created localized space-time distortions that crushed dozens of enemy ships. The harvesters adapted quickly, as they always did. They spread out, refused to cluster, sent disposable drones ahead to trigger traps, but every adaptation took time and gave humanity small victories. Carlos led boarding teams against isolated harvester vessels, using quantum bombs to detonate them from within. His teams took terrible casualties, but they destroyed ships worth far more than their own lives. The Wii battle raged for 3 months as both sides fought their way toward Earth. The harvesters lost thousands of ships, but they kept building more. Humanity's forces dwindled steadily despite fighting with every trick and tactic they could devise. But they were buying time for evacuation, getting civilians into shelters and preparing for the final stand. The harvesters reached Earth orbit and found a planet that refused to surrender. Every satellite was a weapon. Every space station was a fortress. The orbital defense platforms unleashed everything they had, creating a barrier of fire and energy that even the machines struggled to penetrate. Amy's ground forces prepared for landing operations, ready to turn every city into a killing ground. But something happened that changed everything. A massive energy signature appeared at the edge of the solar system. The Sentinel from Kepler 442 arrived, badly damaged but still functional. It had fought the harvester fleet at the archive and lost, but it had not been destroyed. It had fled, leading a portion of the enemy fleet away and arriving at Earth to fulfill its final purpose. The Sentinel broadcast a signal across all frequencies, a call that reached beyond the solar system to wake other Sentinels scattered across the galaxy. Oracle explained what was happening. For thousands of years, the Sentinels had waited, watching for a species that could stand against the Harvesters. Humanity had proven themselves worthy not through victory, but through their refusal to accept extinction. The ancient network was awakening, and they would help humanity rally whatever other survivors existed to make one final stand against the machines.